Hi everyone, and welcome to the Ornament Girl, where we love sharing tips, tricks, and patterns for creating beautiful no-sew quilted ornaments. My name is Kennedy, and in this video I'll be showing you how to create the basic star baseball. Before we go any further, be sure to check out the link below the video to download your free printable supply list that we've included with this pattern. The Basic Star Baseball uses the Basic Star ornament pattern plus a few embellishments to create the adorable look of a baseball ornament. This will make the perfect gift for all of the sports fans in your life, and you can have fun embellishing these ornaments with ribbon bows, charms, and embellishments in your favorite team colors. You can also change out the colors from white and red to yellow and white to create a tennis ball as well. A quick reminder before we get started, this pattern, along with all Ornament Girl patterns, is copyrighted and it's illegal to teach it without our permission. If you have a friend who you think would love to make this baseball ornament, be sure to send them the link to this free pattern tutorial. In order to create this pattern, you will need a soft foam ball, satin straight pins, fabric, ribbon and trim, embellishments, and some ornament making tools. Be sure to grab the printable supply list linked below the video that will give you all of the correct quantities and measurements for your materials, as well as some clickable links to make shopping for them super easy. Once all of your tools and materials are gathered, we can begin creating the Basic Star baseball ornament. The first thing I'm going to do is make a couple of quick marks on my foam. Now, first I want to mention I am using a soft foam ball from the Ornament Girl supply shop that is divided into 8 equal segments. So I'm using an 8-line ball. You can find these 8-line balls in the Ornament Girl supply shop, or if you are using a plain soft foam ball, you can find a tutorial on our foam marking library for how to mark a soft foam ball into 8 equal segments. Once you have your ball marked with those 8 lines, I'm also just going to trace the equator, which is the mold line running around the center of the ball where the two halves meet. I just find it a lot easier to keep an eye on this equator when I have it darkened. Now I'm also just going to mark each of the pole markings, which is the point on either side of the ball where all of the segment lines converge. So on each side, at the one point where all of those segment lines meet up, I'm just going to add a little dot, and that will help me keep an eye on that as I'm creating layer 1 as well. Now that we have our foam divided and marked, we can begin adding some fabric. This entire ornament is made up of basic triangle folds, so after we add the first few folds, you'll definitely have the hang of how to create a basic triangle. You're going to start with a 2 by 3 inch rectangle of fabric and hold this horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you. Now fold the top edge of the fabric down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, but you don't have to be exact about that measurement. Now fold it in half crosswise from left to right and crease to find the center of the piece. Unfold that previous fold, and now you're going to place a pin along that center crease and just a hair below the top folded edge. So we're pinning right in the center of the fabric and just a touch below the top folded edge of the piece. On your ornament, this will be pinned directly along one of the segment lines on the foam, right at the pole marking. And you can pin just a little bit below the pole marking because we're going to be placing 4 pieces up here. So you're pinning along the segment line with your pin right below the pole marking. Make sure the center line of your piece is lined up with the segment line on the foam. And now you can create the triangle. Pinch the left half of the fabric and fold it straight down. Now pinch the right half and fold it straight down, just overlapping the left side enough that one pin could hold both halves in place. And then you want to check that the center line of your triangle is directly in line with the segment line on the foam. That's how we're going to keep all of our lines nice and straight. And once the center of your triangle is lined up with the segment line, use one pin at the bottom center to hold both halves, and then smooth out the left and right corners and pin those in place as well. And just like that, you have added the first basic triangle fold. Let's go ahead and prep our next piece. With another rectangle of fabric, hold this horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease. Fold in half the opposite way and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease, just a hair below the top folded edge of the piece. Now we're going to work on the segment line directly opposite of the piece we just placed. So turn your ball so that you're working on the segment line opposite of that triangle. Pin right into the pole marking directly along the segment line. You don't need to pin into the fabric you already placed, but your pin can sit right against it. Now we're going to create our triangles. So pinch the left half and fold it straight down. Pinch the right half and fold it straight down, just overlapping the left, and make sure that the center line of your triangle is in line with the segment line on the foam. And then pin at the bottom center to hold both halves, and smooth out the edges and pin the left and right corners. Now you've added the second triangle, and to complete layer 1, we only need to add 2 more pieces. Prep another piece of fabric in the exact same way, folding the top edge down and creasing, and then folding in half and creasing that as well, and then pin along the center crease just a hair below the top folded edge. Now we're going to pin this on one of the segment lines that sits right between the triangles we already added, right up there as close to the pole marking as you can get it. Create your basic triangle fold in the exact same way as you did with the previous pieces, making sure that center line is exactly in line with the segment line on the foam, and you want to make sure that there aren't any foam gaps showing between your triangles. So if there's foam showing between your triangle edges, you may want to move the top pin up a little bit. I don't have any foam showing, so I'm good, but a good solution to that would be to move this triangle up toward the pole marking a little more to help reduce those foam gaps. Now we have added the third basic triangle, and you can go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold on the remaining segment line on the foam that sits directly opposite the piece you just placed. Once you have added all 4 basic triangle folds, layer 1 is complete. Layer 2 is made up of those exact same folds, so you're going to prep your fabric rectangles in the exact same way. Holding it with the pattern side facing away from you, fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease. Fold in half and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease, just a hair below the top folded edge. And now we want to give ourselves a consistent point to measure from, so you can place a marker pin at the pole marking. So right there at the point where all of the triangles meet up at one point, you can push a pin in about halfway, and this will just give us a consistent point to measure from as we place these pieces. And for this layer, you will also need your flexible tape measure. The first 4 triangles of this layer will be placed along the same lines as the triangles from layer 1. So go ahead and find the center line of one of those triangles that you placed in the previous layer. And you want to measure from the pin at the center point directly along the segment line on the foam. So I'm measuring from that top center pin down along the center line of the triangle, which is also the segment line on the foam, and pin your prepped piece directly along that line at the 3/4 inch mark. So I'm pinning 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking, keeping my pin centered along this straight line. And now you're going to create your triangle in the exact same way. fold the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left with the center line in line with the segment line on the foam, which should also be in line with the center line of the triangle above it, and then pin at the bottom center. And when you smooth out these left and right corners, they may start to cross this equator line, but you always want to keep the pins above the equator. So you can pin these about 1/4 inch or so above that equator line. That way we won't get too close and we're saving room for the pins from the next layer. Now you've added the first piece of layer 2, and you can go ahead and prep your next piece in the exact same way. And now we're going to repeat the exact same steps. So it doesn't really matter where you move because we're going to be using the 4 triangles from layer 1. So you could move across. I'm just going to move over to the right to the next triangle from layer 1. You're going to find that center line and measure down from the pin along the center line of one of the triangles from the previous layer, and pin along the line, which is also the segment line, 3/4 inch below the pole marking. And then you're going to create your same basic triangle. So fold the left half straight down, then fold the right half straight down, just overlapping the left side. And make sure that the center line is in line with the segment line, because on our final ornament, that's going to give us these nice straight lines. Pin at the bottom center and the left and right edges. And remember, when you're pinning on the left and right edges, you can keep your pins about 1/4 inch above that equator line. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold on top of the remaining 2 triangles from layer 1, each pinned 3/4 inch from the pole marking. Once you have placed 4 basic triangles, we've completed half of layer 2. So now we've added 4 triangles along the center lines from layer 1. Now we're going to repeat the same steps to add triangles along the lines between the pieces that we've already placed. So go ahead and prep another piece of fabric in the exact same way, getting ready to create a basic triangle fold. And now we're going to repeat the same steps, this time measuring along the lines that sit between triangles. So here's a line that's sitting between those triangles from layer 1. You also want to line up with the segment line. So I'm using the second half of my ball to find that segment line and keep my tape measure in line with the segment line on the foam. Pin along that line, again using that 3/4 inch mark. So we're still pinning 3/4 inch below the pole marking. And now you'll create your basic triangle fold in the exact same way, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down to make a triangle. And you want to make sure that that center line is lined up with the segment line. Now, when you're lined up with the segment line, you should have an equal amount showing on either side. So you can see how these little points I've created are symmetrical. If your fold was off-centered, these points would not look the same. So you can also adjust how much you have folded down to make sure you have enough folded down on each side that you're lined up with the segment line, and these little points to the left and the right look symmetrical. Pin in place at the bottom center and the left and right corners, keeping those pins about 1/4 inch above the equator when you're pinning on the left and right sides. That's how we're going to add the remaining pieces for this layer. So go ahead and prep another piece of fabric. And moving to the right of the piece you just placed, find one of the lines that runs between the triangles that you've already added. Measure down from the pole marking along that line between triangles and make sure you're lining up with the segment line on the foam to keep everything nice and straight. Pin along that segment line 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking and create your basic triangle fold, lining right up with the segment line on the foam and making sure that the points on either side look symmetrical. And of course, pin at the bottom center and the left and right edges. Now you've added 2 triangles along the lines between pieces from layer 1. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold to the remaining 2 lines on the foam, each sitting 3/4 of an inch from the pole marking. Once you've added a total of 8 basic triangle folds, layer 2 is complete. You can remove the marker pin from the center of the ornament. And also, I'm going to use my fabric scissors. We don't have a ton of trimming to do on this layer, but I just want to be able to fully see that equator to help me with placing the next layer. So I'm going to trim off any extra little fabric corners that are covering up that equator line. And with that, layer 2 is complete and we only have one more layer left to add. Layer 3 is placed almost exactly like layer 2, so of course you are going to prep your fabric pieces, getting ready to place a basic triangle fold just like we have in the previous layers. And we're going to start placing along the same 4 segment lines that we used for the first triangles of the last layer. And the easiest way to locate these is to find the triangles that are sitting underneath the edges on either side. So here, this triangle is sitting underneath the edges of the triangles that are to the left and right of it, so that's one of the pieces we're going to start with. It's also directly in line with one of the center lines of the triangles from layer 1. Now, instead of measuring from the center point of the ornament, you're going to measure from the tip of layer 2. So I'm measuring from the tip of the triangle in layer 2 directly along the segment line on the foam, and again pin at the 3/4 inch mark. So we're pinning along the segment line 3/4 of an inch from the tip of layer 2. And now you'll create your basic triangle fold, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left, making sure your center line is in line with the segment line on the foam. And for this layer, we want to keep all of our pins directly above the equator. So I'm still pinning at the center, but I'm making sure that those pins sit right along the equator line. And then same for the left and right edges. I'm smoothing them out, and when I place my pin, it's going to be right above that equator line on the foam. That way we can trim below our pins and have a nice trim line right along the equator. And that is how we're going to add the pieces for this layer. So go ahead and prep another piece of fabric. And now moving to the right of the piece you just placed, you're going to skip the triangle that's on the outer layer and move one more to the right to find the next segment line and the triangle that is sitting underneath the pieces that are next to it. Measure down from the top point of that layer 2 triangle directly along the segment line and pin at the 3/4 inch mark. Create that basic triangle fold, keeping everything lined right up with that segment line on the foam, which you can still see on the bottom half of the ornament. And when you pin at the center and the left and right edges, make sure those pins sit directly above the equator line. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to place 2 more basic triangle folds on the remaining 2 segment lines so that you've placed a piece on every other segment line, and they'll each be pinned 3/4 of an inch from the tips of layer 2. Once you have placed those first 4 basic triangle folds, your ornament will look something like this. And now we're just going to repeat the same steps to add a triangle along the remaining 4 segment lines on the foam. So go ahead and prep your next piece of fabric as usual. And once you have that fabric piece prepped, you are going to locate a segment line where you haven't placed a fold for this layer yet. Measure down from the tip of layer 2 directly along that segment line and pin at the 3/4 inch mark. Create that basic triangle fold, and this one will overlap those pieces you've already placed, filling in the gaps around the equator. Of course, make sure you're lined up with the segment line, and then when you pin at the center and the left and right edges, make sure your pins are right above that equator line. Go ahead and prep your next piece. And once you've prepped that piece, move to the right until you find a segment line where you haven't added a piece for this layer yet. Measure down from the tip of layer 2 along the segment line, pin at the 3/4 inch mark, and create that basic triangle fold. Make sure everything's lined up with the segment line on the foam. Pin at the center and the left and right edges, making sure to keep your pins right above the equator. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a layer 3 basic triangle fold along the remaining 2 segment lines on the foam, each pinned 3/4 of an inch below layer 2. Once you've added a total of 8 basic triangles for layer 3, your ornament will look like this. And now we need to trim off the fabric extending beyond the equator. So take your time to very carefully trim off the fabric that's below the pins. And once that is all trimmed up, side 1 of the basic star baseball ornament is complete, and all we need to do is flip this over and complete the same steps to cover side 2. So moving forward in the video, I'm going to give you a brief overview as a reminder of how to complete each layer so that you don't need to sit and watch every single step. But if you do find yourself wanting the more in-depth breakdown of each layer, you can return to the side 1 instructions and use those same steps to cover side 2. You do want to make sure that you place your first 4 triangles along the same segment lines as you did on side 1. So like I said, moving forward, I'll give you a brief overview as a reminder of each layer, or you can rewind to use those same in-depth instructions to cover side 2. For all of the folds on side 2, you are going to prep your fabric pieces in exactly the same way as side 1, holding the rectangle horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you. Fold the top edge down by about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and crease. Fold in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along that center crease, just a hair below the top folded edge. And now you want to locate one of the segment lines where you are placing your first triangles. So on side 1, find a triangle that is sitting underneath the edges of the triangles next to it and follow that segment line up. That's the one you're going to use because that's along the center line of layer 1 on the first side. So follow that up, pin right below the pole marking along the segment line. And now you'll create a basic triangle fold by folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down, just overlapping the left, making sure the center line is in line with that segment line on the foam. Pin at the bottom center and then smooth out the left and right edges and pin those corners in place as well. Now go ahead and prep another piece of fabric. And working directly across from the triangle that you just placed, pin along that segment line right at the pole marking. Create your basic triangle fold, making sure everything stays in line with the segment line on the foam. That's what's going to give us nice straight lines on the finished ornament. Pin at the bottom center and the left and right corners. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold to the remaining 2 segment lines on the foam that sit between the pieces you've already placed. Once you've added a total of 4 basic triangle folds, you want to check and make sure that there are no foam gaps showing between your pieces, and once that is complete, layer 1 is finished. Now you can add a pin to the pole marking right there where all of those triangles meet up. And you only need to push that in about halfway. And now we're going to go ahead and prep another piece to get ready to place our basic triangle folds for layer 2. The first 4 triangle folds of layer 2 will be placed along the center lines of the pieces that you placed in layer 1. So we're not working on the lines between triangles, we're working along the center lines of those pieces you just placed. You're going to measure down from the pole marking along that center line, which is also the segment line on the foam, which you can still see here on side 2. And pin along that segment line 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking. And create that basic triangle fold, lining everything up with the segment line. And as the segment line starts to get covered, you can use these lines from side 1 to line things up as well, because we lined all of those center lines up on the segment line also. Pin at the bottom center and the left and right corners, and remember that for this layer, as you're pinning the left and right edges, you can keep them about 1/4 or maybe even a little bit more, but about 1/4 of an inch above that equator line to leave room for our pins in layer 3 as well. Repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold along every other segment line on the foam, each pinned 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking. Once you've added those 4 basic triangle folds, your ornament will look like this, and now we're going to repeat the same steps to add those folds along the lines between triangles. So of course you're going to prep your fabric pieces in the exact same way. And the steps for adding these will be the same as well. We're just going to be measuring along the 4 segment lines that we haven't used yet on this side. So go ahead and locate that line between triangles, and remember your segment lines are covered, but you can use the straight center lines from side 1 to line everything up as well. So I'm measuring from the pole marking, and I'm going to use these center lines from the previous side to make sure I'm measuring along that segment line. Pin 3/4 of an inch below the pole marking right on that line between triangles. And then create your basic triangle fold in the exact same way, folding the left half straight down and the right half straight down. And as you're lining up your center line, make sure it's in line with this continuous straight line of center folds from side 1. And the points on either side should be symmetrical as well. Pin at the center and the left and right edges a little ways above that equator line. Repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold along the remaining 3 segment lines on the foam. Once you've added a total of 8 basic triangle folds, layer 2 is complete. You can remove that center marker pin, and we're going to trim off those little points of fabric. You don't need to trim a ton, but I just want to be able to see that equator line as I work on layer 3. Once that is trimmed up, layer 2 is complete, and we just have one last layer left to add. Of course, go ahead and prep your fabric piece in the exact same way as the previous pieces. And we're going to start working along the 4 segment lines where the triangles sit underneath those ones that we previously added. So it's the center line of layer 1, and then on layer 2, these pieces are sitting underneath the triangles to the left and the right. You're going to measure down from the tip of that layer 2 triangle directly along this continuous line we have going through the center of our pieces, and pin along that line 3/4 of an inch below the tip of the triangle, and create that basic triangle fold as usual, keeping everything lined up so we have a nice continuous line along each side. And when you pin at the center and the left and right edges, you want those pins sitting just above the equator line. That way when we trim, all of those raw edges will meet right in the center along the equator. So keep an eye on that and make sure all your pins are just above it. Repeat those same steps to add a basic triangle to every other segment line on the foam. Once you've added those 4 basic triangle folds, your ornament will look like this. And if you find it easier, you can go ahead and trim off that extra fabric from those 4 triangles now so that you can keep a closer eye on the equator. Anytime you're trimming on side 2, you want to be very careful not to accidentally cut any of your completed folds on side 1. Now we're going to place the last 4 triangles of layer 3, so we're going to prep our pieces in the exact same way. And we're just going to work along those last 4 pieces from layer 2 that we haven't worked on top of yet. So here's one of the triangles I just placed. The triangle next to it is from layer 2, so I'm going to be working along that segment line, measuring down from the tip of that remaining triangle from layer 2, keeping in line with this straight line we have going all the way through the ornament, pinning at the 3/4 inch mark, creating that basic triangle fold, keeping everything lined up with those continuous center lines, and then pinning at the center and the left and right corners keeping those pins just above that equator line. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add a basic triangle fold to the remaining 3 pieces from layer 2. Once you've placed those remaining basic triangle folds, your ornament will look like this, and now you can trim off that last bit of excess fabric, being very careful not to cut anything that's on side 1. And once that is all trimmed up, side 2 of your ornament is complete, and we can cover these raw edges and pins using a fabric band. With a 2 by 10.5 inch strip of fabric, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in thirds lengthwise. You might not be able to fold the entire piece at once, and that's okay. You can work with a few inches at a time. And then flip that over so that the long raw edge is facing away from you. And now you can decide where you would like the top of your ornament to be. I'm going to align the top center with a set of these triangles that sits underneath the pieces next to it. So it's the center line of layer 1, and then for layer 2 and 3, the triangles are covered up by the edges of the pieces next to it, as opposed to these which overlap. So I'm working on these lower layers. I'm going to come up to the top center and use 2 pins to hold this in place. And now, keeping it folded in thirds, you're going to wrap it all the way around the ornament, covering the raw edges and pins as you go. And you want to pull tight enough so that it lies smooth over the foam, but not so tightly that you're really distorting any pattern you may have on the fabric. And when you return to the top center, you're going to use 2 pins. I'm keeping them in line with the center lines of those triangles to secure the band, and then trim off the extra. Now that you have added all of the fabric pieces and the foam is completely covered, we can use some embellishments to turn this basic star ornament into a baseball. To create the stitching on the baseball, you are going to use a long piece of braided gimp trim. It's about 20 inches long, but you could add a little bit more if that's what you have handy. I used a match just to singe the end of my trim a little bit to keep it from fraying. That is optional, but it does help. Now you're going to find the top center of the ornament. This line is where we're going to start our trim, and this will start on the back of the ornament. So if one side of your ornament looks better or is a little cleaner, you want to choose the side you're going to use for the back. And you're going to come down from the top center directly along that straight line, and at the bottom tip of the layer 2 triangle, so here's layer 3 and then here's layer 2, you're going to lay your trim there, right below that bottom tip, and pin it in place. And now we're going to wrap this around our ornament to look like a baseball, but for now we're going to use temporary pins. So we're just going to add pins halfway through to hold the trim in place, and then once we're happy with where the trim lays, we can go back and use embellish pins. So you're going to bring your trim over to the right, and then it's going to follow this diagonal line at the top right corner. So here's the top center, here's this diagonal line. So I'm going to just use temporary pins, pushing them in about halfway along the way here to bring my trim up along this diagonal line. And where it crosses over the band, I'm going to add some pins to help hold it in place, so that now we can flip over to the front of the ornament, and it's still going to follow this same diagonal line that it was working on. So we're going to bring it down along that diagonal line, and now it needs to curve down to the bottom left. So here's where our trim is pinned. This is the straight horizontal line, and we want to curve down to this bottom left diagonal line. And you don't want it to be a straight line like this. You want it to curve. So I'm going to try to help this trim lay in a curve until it reaches the tip of this triangle down here. And you can use as many temporary pins, push them in just halfway as you need to help hold that trim in place. Now it's going to follow this same diagonal line, cross over the band, and now we're back to the back side of the ornament. Come straight up on the diagonal line that you're already working on. And now it's going to skip over this straight vertical one and come here to the left, the bottom left diagonal line. You want to curve right to the tip of that triangle. And you want to help this sit in a curve. You don't want it to just shoot straight over. That's why GIMP trim is super nice to use for this, because this braided piece curves really nicely. Now I'm going to follow the center line of those triangles, cross over the band, and now we're back to the front. Follow this same diagonal line straight up through the triangles until you reach the tip, and then it's going to curve over to the top right diagonal line right here. So I'm curving over to the top right, making sure it curves. You don't want it in just a straight line. It's going to hit the tip of that triangle, and then it can follow the straight lines of those triangles all the way over the band. And now we're back to the back. We're just going to finish this off by following this diagonal line we're already working on. And then it's going to curve to the right and meet up with where we started our trim. And now you can trim off the extra. And if you look at the front side, that's looking just like a baseball, and we used our basic triangle folds to help follow the curve. And now you can use embellished pins. I'm using red beads threaded onto regular pins. You could choose to use crystal beads, or you could use pearl head pins instead of threading beads onto pins. But we're just going to space these out throughout the folds to help hold them in place. So at the starting and stopping point, I'm going to add a bead to cover that pin that's there. And now throughout the trim, I'm going to add some beads, and you, depending on the trim you're using, you may need more or less pins to help hold it in place. So I'm going to start by replacing the temporary pins along the band, and then I'm going to continue working around and adding extra pins where it looks like the trim needs some help. So just go ahead and work your way around the ornament, removing these temporary pins and replacing them with some embellished pins that will blend into the trim a little bit better. On the front sides, you can of course use the triangles to help you equally space your embellished pins. And like I said, some trim may hold its shape a little bit better than others, so you can opt to use more or less embellished pins here, depending on how cooperative your trim is. So I'm just going to continue working around, adding these beaded pins every so often along the trim to help hold it in place. Once you have added all of those beaded pins, your trim should be nice and secure in that baseball stitching design. I have a little bit of fraying edges here, so I'm going to go ahead and trim them up. And then like I said, with some trims you can use a lighter or a little match to just singe those edges. But in this case, I think just trimming it as close as I can get it to that bead will do the trick. Now that we have that baseball stitching added, I'll show you how to add some ribbon bows and a hanger to the top of your ornament. You're going to start with a 28-inch piece of ribbon. You could use this long uncut piece of ribbon to do the loop and pin method, or you can do the gift bow style, which is what I'm going to do. I find that helps me to keep my ribbon loops nice and even. Go ahead and fold your 28-inch piece of ribbon in half, forming a fold at the center, and cut at that center fold, so you now have two equal pieces of ribbon. Now you can fold those in half one more time and cut so that you have 4 equal pieces of ribbon. Now holding those 4 equal pieces together, fold them in half, but this time don't cut them. You're going to pin at that center point, catching all 4 ribbon pieces on the pin, and then flip that pin over and spread those ribbon pieces out on your working surface. And then one by one, fold each ribbon end back and onto the pin until you've completed your bow. Once you've folded back all of the ribbon ends, go ahead and flip that over, and now you can see that you've created a beautiful bow, and you're going to pin that right into the top center of the ornament. And now we're going to complete a couple more bow layers. Repeat those exact same steps with a 26-inch piece of ribbon to create a second bow. Once you've created that second bow, go ahead and pin it right on top of the first 2 bows that you placed. And now we just have one more bow layer left to create. You're going to use a 24-inch piece of ribbon to repeat those same steps to create your final bow. Once you've completed that final bow, go ahead and pin it right on top of the first 2. And of course, you can use these bows to show off your favorite team colors. And once we've added that fluffy tiered bow to the top, we can go ahead and create our hanger. With a 10-inch piece of hanger string, put the ends together and tie them in a knot. And now go ahead and thread a pin with a bead. You could also add bead caps or other embellishments here. And then pin this right through the knot on the hanger string. And if you want to trim off those extra little tails, you can do that. Now you're going to pin this right into the top center of your ornament, covering the pin at the center of the bows and giving a perfect way to hang the ornament. And with that, your basic star baseball is complete. I hope you really enjoyed following along with this basic star tutorial and with the instructions for turning your basic star into an adorable baseball ornament. I can't wait to see all of the fun sports team themed ornaments that you create with this pattern, and don't forget that you can turn this into a tennis ball super easily as well. Be sure to subscribe to the Ornament Girl channel for more free patterns and tutorials just like this one, and as always, happy ornamenting!